May 18th, 1944. Two British commandos crouched on a French beach in complete darkness, photographing German mines. Their mission was critical, gathering intelligence for the D-Day invasion just weeks away. Then their infrared camera flashed. In an instant, the beach erupted with German star shells and gunfire. The firefight was brutal. Two commandos escaped by swimming to their boat. Two didn't. Lieutenant George Lane and Lieutenant Roy Wooldridge were captured as dawn broke, and according to Hitler's commando order, signed 18 months earlier, they had hours to live. Here's what makes this story extraordinary. Within days, one of these commandos would be sitting in an elegant French château, drinking tea with Germany's most famous general, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox. And the conversation they had wasn't just remarkable, it was impossible. Because the commando sitting across from Rommel was hiding a secret that, if discovered, would guarantee his immediate execution. He wasn't just a British soldier, he was a Hungarian Jew named György Lányi, who'd changed his identity to fight the Nazis. If you're fascinated by impossible moments in history, when humanity surfaces in the middle of total war, stay with me. Because in the next 30 minutes, you're going to discover the complete story of this extraordinary encounter. You'll get the exact dialogue from that tea meeting, reconstructed from Lane's own accounts. You'll learn about Hitler's commando order, the war crime that sentenced hundreds of Allied special forces to death. And you'll understand why Rommel's decision in that chateau library saved Lane's life, and how Lane repaid that debt in the most unexpected way. Before we dive in, if stories like this, where history reveals the complexity of human character under impossible pressure, resonate with you, hit that like button. It helps others discover these forgotten moments. If you're fascinated by impossible moments in history, when humanity surfaces in the middle of total war, stay with me, because in the next 30 minutes you're going to discover the complete story of this extraordinary encounter. You'll get the exact dialogue from that tea meeting, reconstructed from Lane's own accounts. You'll learn about Hitler's commando order, the war crime that sentenced hundreds of Allied special forces to death. And you'll understand why Rommel's decision in that chateau library saved Lane's life, and how Lane repaid that debt in the most unexpected way. Before we dive in, if stories like this, where history reveals the complexity of human character under impossible pressure, resonate with you, hit that like button. It helps others discover these forgotten moments. Now, let's understand what Lane and Wooldridge were walking into when German soldiers pulled them from that dinghy at dawn. Operation Tarbrush wasn't some random commando raid. This was a series of reconnaissance missions along the French coast in May 1944, the final intelligence gathering before D-Day. Lane and Wooldridge's specific mission, codenamed Tarbrush 10, targeted the beaches near Cailleux-sur-Mer in the Pas-de-Calais region. Their objective was precise: photograph German beach mines, examine how they were installed, and determine if they'd actually detonate when Allied forces landed. The team consisted of 4 men. Lane commanded. Wooldridge was the mine expert, a Royal Engineers officer who could identify German explosives in the dark. Sergeant Bluff and Corporal King rounded out the team. They launched from a motor torpedo boat around 2 in the morning on May 18th. The plan was simple: row to shore in darkness, photograph the mines with an infrared camera that wouldn't alert German patrols, collect samples if possible, and return before dawn. The mission was going perfectly until the camera flashed. One malfunction, one burst of light on a beach the Germans watched constantly. Imagine that moment. You're lying on a French beach in total darkness. You've been photographing mines for 30 minutes. Silent, invisible. Then your camera betrays you with a flash bright enough to be seen from German positions hundreds of yards away. Within seconds, star shells illuminated the entire shoreline. It was like someone turned on stadium lights. German machine guns opened fire from multiple positions. The beach became a kill zone. The 4 commandos scattered, trying to make it back to their dinghy through a storm of bullets. Bluff and King made it. They reached the dinghy, pushed off into the surf, and swam toward the motor torpedo boat under heavy fire. The boat crew pulled them aboard. Lane and Wooldridge weren't as fortunate. They were pinned down by crossfire. When the firing finally stopped around 3 in the morning, they were stranded on enemy-controlled beach with no way to reach the boat. They found another dinghy and tried to paddle out to sea, hoping to drift far enough from shore to be spotted by Allied patrols. At dawn, a German patrol boat spotted them and captured them. Here's where the death sentence kicks in. On October 18, 1942, more than 18 months before Lane's capture, Adolf Hitler signed the Commando Befehl, the Commando Order. This wasn't some vague directive. It was explicit, crystal clear, terrifying. It ordered the immediate execution of all Allied commandos encountered by German forces. And I mean all. It didn't matter if they were in proper uniform. Didn't matter if they tried to surrender. Didn't matter if they were wounded. The order stated they were to be annihilated to the last man, with no pardon on any account. The order applied across Europe and North Africa. It was distributed in just 12 copies initially because Hitler knew it violated the Geneva Convention. German officers who failed to execute captured commandos could be prosecuted for negligence under German military law. And this wasn't theoretical. Hundreds of Allied commandos were executed under this order between 1942 and 1945. After the war, at the Nuremberg trials, the commando order was declared a war crime. German officers who'd followed it were found guilty. Some were executed. So when Lane and Wooldridge were pulled from that dinghy on May 18th, they knew exactly what awaited them. They'd been briefed on the commando order before their mission. Every Allied commando operating in Europe knew about it by 1944. It was the worst-case scenario they'd trained themselves not to think about. Capture meant execution, not imprisonment, not interrogation, and then POW camp. Death. Usually within 72 hours. Within hours of their capture, a Gestapo officer confirmed it. He approached them in their cell and told them directly, without emotion, "You will be shot under the commando order." This wasn't a threat meant to intimidate them during interrogation. This was a statement of fact. The administrative machinery was already in motion. They were held in cellars at Cailleux-sur-Mer for several days. Then came the blindfolds, the drive, the château, and the tea that should never have happened. Let me give you the context you need to understand why this tea meeting was so impossible, and why Rommel's decision carried so much weight. Drop a comment if you knew about Hitler's commando order before this video. I'm genuinely curious how many people realize this systematic execution program existed. First, the commando order wasn't Hitler's paranoid overreaction. Well, it was that, but it had a specific trigger. During the Dieppe raid in August 1942, Allied forces landed on the French coast in a disastrous operation that resulted in massive casualties. After the raid, German forces discovered orders on captured Allied soldiers that discussed binding and eliminating German prisoners in certain situations. Hitler used this as justification, claiming Allied commandos violated the Geneva Convention first. But here's the reality. The Geneva Convention of 1929 and the Hague Convention of 1907 both protected uniformed soldiers who surrendered. Hitler's order was a direct, deliberate violation of international law. The Nuremberg Tribunal didn't just declare it a war crime, they systematically prosecuted German officers who'd followed it. The documented executions are chilling. On October 23, 1942, just 5 days after the order was signed, 7 British commandos who'd raided the Glomfjord power station in Norway were executed. In November 1942, 34 British commandos captured after a raid were shot. Operation Musketoon, Operation Freshman. Raid after raid, commandos who should have been treated as prisoners of war were executed instead. By May 1944, when Lane was captured, the order had been in effect for 18 months. It was well known among German forces. It was enforced. Allied intelligence knew about it. That's why commandos understood capture meant death. The pattern was consistent: capture, brief interrogation, transfer to SS or Gestapo, execution, usually within days. Now, let's talk about Rommel, because understanding who he was makes Lane's survival even more remarkable. Erwin Rommel, born November 15, 1891, in Heidenheim, Germany. By 1944, he was Germany's most famous general, the Desert Fox, the brilliant tactician who'd commanded the Afrika Korps in North Africa from 1941 to 1943, the general who'd earned respect from even his enemies. Winston Churchill praised him before the House of Commons as a very daring and skillful opponent and a great general. Patton respected him. Montgomery respected him. That's rare in war. But here's where it gets complicated, and this is crucial for understanding the tea meeting. Rommel's reputation, both during the war and after, has been the subject of massive historical debate. There's even a term for it: the Rommel myth. Some historians argue Rommel was whitewashed after the war, portrayed as the good German to make it easier for West Germany to rebuild its military during the Cold War. Others argue his character genuinely set him apart from the Nazi regime. The evidence is mixed, and I want to give you both sides because this matters. On one hand, Rommel joined the Nazi Party. He accepted Hitler's patronage. He commanded German forces. He wasn't some secret resistance fighter. His loyalty to Germany was absolute for most of the war. Some historians point out that his refusal to commit atrocities in North Africa was simply following standard military conduct, not extraordinary heroism. On the other hand, there's a documented pattern of Rommel refusing Hitler's illegal orders. Multiple sources confirm he refused to execute Jewish prisoners of war. He refused orders to deport Jews from North Africa and France. In North Africa, the Afrika Korps fought what Rommel called Krieg ohne Hass, war without hate. There were no documented war crimes. He ensured wounded Allied soldiers received medical supplies. He regularly inquired about the condition of prisoners of war. And critically for Lane's story, Rommel had a documented pattern of refusing to follow the commando order. In November 1941, before the order even existed, British commandos raided Rommel's headquarters trying to kill him. The raid failed. The commando leader, Major Geoffrey Keyes, was killed. Rommel ordered him buried with full military honors. When the commando order came down in October 1942, multiple sources claim Rommel refused to follow it. Some sources say he burned his copy. Here's what we know for certain. By May 1944, Rommel commanded German forces defending France against the expected Allied invasion. He knew it was coming. He didn't know when or where. That was Lane's mission, to help figure out the where. Rommel had his headquarters at the Château de la Roche-Guyon, an elegant fortified chateau on the Seine. And when 2 British commandos were captured examining beach defenses in his sector, the standard procedure was clear. Interrogate briefly, transfer to Gestapo or SS, execute under the commando order. That's what the Gestapo officer told Lane would happen. But Rommel made a different choice. He ordered the commandos brought to his chateau. He separated them. Wooldridge was held in one location, Lane in another. And then Rommel did something extraordinary. He invited Lane into his library, ordered tea and sandwiches, sat down across from a captured enemy soldier, and started a conversation. Now, before I tell you what happened in that room, you need to subscribe if you want more stories like this, because the dialogue that follows, the actual words exchanged between Rommel and Lane, is one of the most fascinating conversations in World War II history. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss it. Let's go into that library. Picture this. You're George Lane. Actually, you're Gheorghe Lanyi, born in Upper Hungary on January 18, 1915. Your family were wealthy Jewish landowners. You moved to London in 1935 as the situation for Jews in Europe deteriorated. You joined the British Army. You volunteered for the commandos specifically because you wanted to fight Nazis. You changed your name. You claimed to be Welsh when people asked about your accent. And now you're sitting in a library across from General Feldmarschall Erwin Rommel, one of the most powerful men in the German military, hoping he doesn't ask too many questions about your background. Because if Rommel discovers you're Jewish, the commando order is the least of your problems. Discovery means immediate transfer to the SS, probably torture, definitely execution. Your only protection is your cover story and your fluency in multiple languages, which you're now pretending you don't have. Lane made a critical decision the moment he entered that library. He would pretend not to understand German, even though he was fluent. This meant everything Rommel said would go through a translator, giving Lane extra seconds to think through every answer. It was a calculated risk. If Rommel tested him and caught the deception, it could raise fatal questions. The library was elegant. Books lined the walls. This was Rommel's personal space in the château. An aide had already brought Lane sandwiches and coffee while he waited. Now Rommel entered, and the conversation began. Rommel's opening line, according to Lane's account, was direct. "So, are you one of those gangster commandos?" Think about that phrasing, gangster commandos. That was the Nazi propaganda term for Allied special forces, portraying them as outside the laws of war, justifying their execution. Rommel was testing Lane immediately. Lane's response, delivered through the translator, was brilliant. "I don't know what the field marshal means by gangster commandos. Gangsters are gangsters, but commandos are the best soldiers in the world." Rommel smiled. Just briefly, but he smiled. That's significant. Lane had simultaneously defended his unit and shown nerve. He wasn't cowering. He was meeting Rommel as a soldier. Rommel continued, "Perhaps you are not a gangster, but we've had some very bad experiences concerning commandos. Do you realize that you have been taken prisoner under very strange circumstances?" Lane's reply was perfectly calibrated. "I hardly think they were strange, more unfortunate and unhappy." Notice the tone. Lane isn't pleading. He's not trying to ingratiate himself. He's matching Rommel's directness with his own. He's treating this as a conversation between military professionals, not a prisoner begging for his life. Rommel shifted to the threat. "You are in a very serious situation." He accused Lane of being a saboteur. And here's where Lane took a risk that could have ended the conversation. He challenged Rommel directly. "If the field marshal took me for a saboteur, he would not have invited me here." Read that again. Lane just told Rommel that this meeting proves Rommel doesn't believe the Nazi propaganda about commandos. He's forcing Rommel to acknowledge that he sees Lane as a legitimate soldier, not a gangster or saboteur. Rommel's response is telling. "So you think this was an invitation?" Lane doubled down. "Naturally, yes, and I take it as a great honor. I'm delighted to be here." delighted to be here. The man who'd been told hours earlier he'd be executed under the commando order just told Germany's most famous general he was delighted to be having tea with him. The audacity is remarkable, and Rommel smiled broadly this time, because Lane had done something clever. He'd reframed the entire interaction. Instead of a captor interrogating a prisoner, this was now two military professionals having a conversation. Lane had given Rommel a way to see him as a soldier deserving of respect, not a commando requiring execution. The conversation continued. Rommel asked about the Allied invasion. Where would it land? When? With how many divisions? This was the intelligence question worth everything. The entire German defensive strategy depended on knowing where the Allies would strike. Hitler believed it would be Pas de Calais, the shortest crossing from England. Allied deception operations were working overtime to reinforce that belief, even though the actual target was Normandy. Lane was a junior officer, a lieutenant. He genuinely didn't know the invasion plans, but anything he said could matter. Every piece of intelligence, even from a junior commando, could shift German defensive deployments. So Lane's deflection was perfect. He said he was too junior to know invasion plans, not privy to that level of strategy, just a soldier following orders. When Rommel pressed, Lane suggested the shortest crossing, which implied Pas de Calais, reinforcing the deception. We don't know if Lane was deliberately feeding Rommel misinformation, or if he genuinely didn't know and was making an educated guess. But his answer supported Allied deception strategy perfectly. Rommel asked about Montgomery. How's Montgomery doing? This is fascinating because Rommel and Montgomery had faced each other in North Africa. There was professional respect there, despite being enemies. Lane replied that Montgomery was preparing the invasion and he'll be here shortly. It's a threat wrapped in polite conversation. You're going to lose this war, Field Marshal. My commander is coming for you. Then Rommel pivoted to something revealing about his own thinking. He expressed the view that Britain and Germany should be allies against the Soviet Union. This wasn't unusual thinking among some German officers, but it shows Rommel was willing to share his political views with a captured enemy soldier. That's trust, or testing, possibly both. Lane, showing remarkable nerve, asked Rommel a question. Prisoners don't usually interrogate field marshals. Lane asked how French people were reacting to German occupation. Rommel's answer was propaganda straight from the Nazi playbook. The French had never been so happy and so well organized. This was obviously false. French resistance was active, and the occupation was brutal in many areas. But Rommel either believed it or was maintaining the party line. Throughout this conversation, several things are happening simultaneously. Rommel is probing for intelligence about Allied invasion plans. Lane is deflecting while maintaining his cover. Both men are assessing each other's character, and underlying everything is the unspoken question. What happens to Lane when this conversation ends? Because the commando order still existed. The Gestapo was expecting Lane, and Rommel had to make a decision. The conversation lasted well over an hour. They drank tea, ate sandwiches, talked about the war, about strategy, about their respective commanders. And when it ended, Lane thanked Rommel for his time. That's how he later described it. He thanked the man who could order his execution as if they'd just had a pleasant social visit. Then came the blindfold again, the drive. But this time, the destination wasn't execution, it was prison. But not just any prison. Here's what happened next, and why it reveals so much about Rommel's character and the impossible choices of war. Lane and Wooldridge were driven at high speed to Gestapo headquarters in Paris. Lane later described hearing the screams of prisoners being tortured in other rooms. This wasn't hyperbole. Gestapo interrogation centers were sites of systematic torture and murder. The fact that Lane and Wooldridge were brought there meant the machinery of execution was in motion. The commando order was being followed, except it wasn't. The Gestapo interrogation of Lane and Wooldridge was, in Lane's words, conducted in a dilatory fashion. Dilatory. That means slow, deliberately delaying. The Gestapo went through the motions but didn't push hard. After 2 days at Gestapo headquarters, 2 days that should have ended in execution, both commandos were transferred. But here's the critical detail. They weren't transferred to the SS. They were transferred to Fresnes prison and from there to Oflag 9A/H at Spangenberg Castle in Hesse, Germany. This was an officer's prisoner of war camp, a camp governed by Geneva Convention protections, a camp where survival was possible. Lane believed, and stated until his death in 2010, that Rommel interceded on their behalf, that Rommel made a deliberate decision to save them by ensuring they went to POW camps rather than to execution. We don't have documentation of Rommel's intervention. No written order survives, but the circumstantial evidence is powerful. Standard procedure under the commando order was execution within days. Hundreds of commandos were killed this way between 1942 and 1945. Lane and Wooldridge were captured in Rommel's sector. The Gestapo prepared to execute them. Then suddenly they're transferred to an officer's POW camp. That doesn't happen without someone with serious authority making it happen. And the only person with that authority who'd met with Lane was Rommel. I've linked a resource in the description about the commando order and documented cases where German officers saved prisoners by circumventing it. It's rare, but it happened. And when it did, it required someone at field marshal level to override the SS and Gestapo. So Rommel saved them. Now, let's talk about what that cost him and whether Lane repaid that debt. Lane spent nearly a year in the POW camp at Spangenberg Castle. He and Wooldridge were separated. The conditions were difficult but survivable. Lane eventually escaped in March 1945 as Allied forces advanced into Germany. He made his way to Paris, where his brother-in-law, Victor Rothschild, yes, that Rothschild family, sheltered him. Lane later joked that Rothschild's house had plenty of Chateau Lafite and Dom Perignon, but no hot water. Both Lane and Wooldridge survived the war. Both were awarded the Military Cross for their actions during Operation Tarbrush. Lane achieved the rank of colonel. Wooldridge became principal of Derby College of Art and Technology. Two men who should have been executed under Hitler's direct order lived full lives because Rommel said no. Now, Rommel's fate. This is where the story becomes tragedy. On July 17, 1944, just 2 months after his tea with Lane, Rommel's staff car was attacked by Royal Air Force Hawker Typhoons. The car crashed. Rommel suffered serious skull fractures and head injuries. He was hospitalized and sent back to Germany for recovery. Here's where it gets controversial. Some sources claim Lane escaped, contacted British intelligence, and provided information about Rommel's location that led to the RAF attack. Lane himself mentioned passing intelligence to the Special Operations Executive about Rommel's whereabouts. But the timeline is disputed. The RAF attack happened in July. Lane's escape wasn't until March 1945. The math doesn't work unless Lane somehow got intelligence out from inside the POW camp, which is possible but unverified. What we know for certain is that Rommel's injury took him out of command during the critical D-Day period and the Battle for Normandy. Whether Lane had anything to do with that remains uncertain. 3 days after Rommel's injury, on July 20, 1944, German officers attempted to assassinate Hitler. The plot failed. During interrogations and investigations, Rommel's name came up. Whether Rommel actually participated in the conspiracy is debated among historians. He'd been meeting with conspirators. He opposed Hitler's strategy, but he'd also opposed assassination, preferring to arrest Hitler and put him on trial. It didn't matter. Hitler decided Rommel was implicated. On October 14, 1944, two German generals visited Rommel at his home. They gave him a choice: face a public trial before the People's Court, which would result in execution and disgrace for his family, or take cyanide now, and Hitler would give him a state funeral and protect his family. Rommel told his wife and son what was happening. He took the cyanide. The official Nazi story was that he died from complications of his July 17th injuries. Hitler ordered a state funeral. Rommel was buried with full military honors. Lane later said, "George was surely the last non-German to see him alive," referring to their May meeting. That's almost certainly true. 4 months after serving Lane tea and saving his life, Rommel was dead by forced suicide. So here's the character question that historians still debate. Was Rommel the good German, a professional soldier who refused to commit atrocities and saved lives when he could? Or was he a Nazi general whose refusal to follow some illegal orders doesn't erase his service to Hitler's regime? The Holocaust Encyclopedia and multiple scholarly sources lay out both perspectives. Rommel served Hitler. He commanded German forces. His decisions enabled Nazi Germany's war effort. The fact that he didn't personally commit war crimes doesn't make him a hero. But, and this is a significant but, Rommel also made specific choices that saved specific lives. He refused to execute Jewish prisoners. He refused to deport Jews from North Africa and France. He refused to follow the commando order. And when he could have sent 2 British commandos to certain death, he invited one for tea instead, and then saved both. Lane never forgot. He returned to Château de la Roche-Guyon in 1984 to write an article for the Sunday Telegraph. He returned again in 2004 for a BBC documentary. Every time he said the same thing: "Rommel saved my life." Maybe the truth is complicated. Maybe people contain contradictions. Maybe you can serve a monstrous regime and still make humane choices in individual moments. History isn't clean. Let's bring this full circle. Because this story isn't just about one tea meeting in 1944. It's about choices under impossible pressure. Here's what you now know. In May 1944, Hitler's commando order had been systematically executing Allied special forces for 18 months. Hundreds were killed. German officers who refused to follow the order could be prosecuted. The machinery of execution was efficient and merciless. George Lane and Roy Wooldridge should have died. The Gestapo told them they would be shot. The procedure was clear. The order was explicit. But Rommel, a field marshal in Hitler's army, chose differently. He invited Lane for tea. He talked with him as a soldier, not a saboteur. And when the conversation ended, he sent both commandos to POW camps instead of execution. Lane lived to age 95. He married Miriam Rothschild, a renowned entomologist. He had 4 children. He achieved the rank of colonel. He spent decades telling this story, always crediting Rommel with saving his life. Wooldridge lived a full life as well, became an educator, raised a family. 2 men who photographed German mines on a French beach in the middle of the night survived because one German general said no to Hitler's order. Here's what I want you to take away. War reveals character in extreme clarity. The choices people make when following orders means death or disobedience, means consequences show who they actually are. Rommel had every institutional incentive to follow the commando order. He chose not to. Lane had every reason to show fear in that library. He chose wit and nerve instead. These aren't simple heroes and villains. Rommel served Hitler until he was forced to suicide for allegedly plotting against him. Lane fought for Britain while hiding his Jewish identity because discovery meant death. War complicates everything. But in that château library in May 1944, two men had a conversation that saved lives. And that matters. If you found this story compelling, here's what I want you to do. Subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. Share this video with someone who appreciates complex history. And drop a comment telling me what other impossible moments from World War II you want me to cover. Because history is full of these stories where humanity breaks through the machinery of war. In my next video, I'm revealing another impossible moment when a German pilot risked everything to save an American bomber crew instead of shooting them down. The story is called the Charlie Brown and Franz Stiegler incident, and it'll change how you think about enemies in war. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.